To unravel all this and more, I'm joined by former advisor to China's central bank, David Daokui Li. David, thanks so much for joining us.
You're most welcome.
I have many questions for you
to
pick your brain on. If the polls are accurate, it would seem that this would be the second straight quarter of sub 5% growth for China. And it would seem that China's growth target of around 5% for this year is at stake. With all the stimulus measures that we have seen being announced in the lead up to today, is China in emergency mode, as some analysts have said?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it emergency mode, but I would call it a situation of great concern, a grave concern. Now, why is that? Because in terms of 5% GDP growth rate target, that is not too much a concern. As I said multiple times before, that 5% is real GDP growth. The real GDP growth is calculated by nominal GDP. Nominal GDP, right? Current price on current price. This year's current price, last year's current price, divided by what we call GDP deflator, which is a mystery, which nobody knows the accurate number, right? So that number is mystery. So in the end, even though the nominal GDP rate in the denominator is in the numerator is low, the denominator, the GDP deflator, can be mystery. So in the end, 5% wouldn't be a big issue, right? However, the big concern is whether the momentum of the sliding down of the economy will be reversed.
So you are suggesting that it's likely that China would be able to hit this around 5% growth target, is what you're saying?
Yeah, well, something near 5%. But I am, as a professional economist, I would pay more attention to two things. One is nominal GDP growth rate. That is the GDP calculated at today's price divided by GDP of last year calculated at last year's price. That's the number that most people feel. Most people, have feelings, right?
But I guess one of the things that a lot of people have questions about is the timing of this flurry of stimulus measures that we've seen. We know that the economic data has not exactly been rosy for some time. So now, why now? Is it too little too late?
Well, actually, people like me have been arguing for major policy adjustments about just at least 1 year ago, okay? So then gradually, all sensors in the engineering language, all sensors of the economy, all messages of the economy flowing in, began to flow into decision makers' desks. So finally, they hear the message. Finally, they are making adjustments. I wouldn't say too late, but I would argue that it should be more. It's not late, but it's, push it hard.
We have already seen a lot being announced, different ministries announcing their plans. What more are you looking to see? Is it those fiscal stimulus measures that people have been talking about?
The single most important policy measure, by far the single most important one, is I call debt swap. That is, the central government that needs to boost its own issuance of central government debt or sovereign debt, using proceeds of the issuing of sovereign debt to swap out local government debt. Why is that? Because local governments normally spend around 41% of GDP, whatever, either hiring employees or doing construction, 41%. By the way, consumers only spend about 38% of GDP. The number might be too inaccurate, too much. It's downward biased. Anyway, so local governments are now shrinking because they are pushed to pay back their debt. They have accumulated around, by my calculation, 100% GDP in the amount of local debt. They simply cannot service the debt, let alone paying back the debt. So local governments, in turn, are squeezing some of their employees, delaying their welfare or bonus payments, and squeezing their suppliers, delaying payments. So by my calculation, around 7 to 8%, may even be 10% of GDP is the amount of the delayed payment. So once that swap is done, this 10% of GDP will be gradually released to various suppliers. That is the single most important fiscal stimulus. By the way, this is not a fiscal deficit. This is an asset liability operation of the government.
You talk about fiscal deficit. We are looking ahead to the top legislature's standing committee meeting sometime by this month. So then do you expect them to reveal or approve fiscal stimulus measures? And if so, how much? Or what should we expect?
Yeah, I do expect the NPC standing committee will meet very soon, end of this month. And one of the major new agenda item is this issue, debt issue. But I really hope I'm arguing very hard as a professional economist, but sometimes me and my colleagues are not so effective. I blame ourselves. We're not able to communicate in layman's language. I hope they understand the following thing. That is, this time around, it is not simply the deficit of budget. It is asset management operation. That is, central government issuing debt, increasing liability, meanwhile using the liability to acquire local debt as asset. So it's the operation of, the balance sheet operation. It's not a current account operation.
Right. One final question before we have to go. There are questions as to whether the current stimulus measures effectively address the longer-term issues facing China's economy, particularly weak domestic demand and the property sector. What is your take?
Very simple, okay? The Chinese economy is having an acute problem, a short-term acute problem. Like me, hypothetically, I got the cold. I feel very bad. First, solve the problem of the cold, getting cold under the weather, right? And then solve the problem of my cholesterol level, my blood pressure. Later on, solve that problem. That problem, I know, we can do another interview talking about that problem. There are various issues to be resolved in order to boost domestic consumption.
Thank you so much, David, for your time. I wish we could continue chatting, but we have to leave it there. I was speaking to former advisor to China's central bank, David Daokui Li.